Hola a todos, bienvenido a esta nueva edición del CTO Summit. Estamos en el año 2020 y por supuesto, como podéis saber todos, estamos retransmitiendo en directo y en diferido algunas partes del CTO Summit de este año, así que estamos en casa, aunque no lo parezca. Espero que todos estéis bien y esto no significa que no vayamos a pasar un grandísimo rato. Mi nombre es Alex Barrera y bienvenidos al CTO Summit de este año. Como sabréis, va a ser un poquito diferente, así que vamos a ir usando la plataforma de Brela para que os podáis conectar y visualicéis todo el contenido. Dicho eso, os tenéis que registrar en Brela. Lógicamente, si me estáis viendo, probablemente ya estéis registrados, pero echarle un ojo al networking porque podéis poner distintas reuniones one-on-one con la gente que os interese para que podáis hablar, para que podáis disfrutar del networking. Y también, súper importante, acordaros de que podéis ver las entrevistas que hemos grabado previamente a la conferencia y que podéis acceder a ellas desde Brela. Es un pelín complicado. Yo aquí, la organización se mete conmigo, pero es un pelín complicado. Hay que ir al apartado de más, de more, y dentro de eso tenéis dos pestañas o dos links donde podéis comprobar el contenido que hemos grabado en exclusiva para el CTO Summit 2020. Requiere contraseña, ¿vale? Entonces la contraseña está justo encima de los dos links. Lo digo porque a mí me pasó, se me olvidó, así que acordaros, podéis ver ahí. Os lo recomiendo encarecidamente. Yo estuve entrevistando a muchos de nuestros ponentes y la verdad es que salieron cosas súper chulas, así que por favor, si tenéis un huequillo y si os interesan los ponentes, echadle un ojo que os va a gustar. Y por último, siempre importante, que le demos las gracias a todos los sponsors que hacen que esta conferencia sea posible. Muchísimas gracias a todos, más en estos tiempos difíciles que tenemos ahora, en donde no es tan sencillo ni montar una conferencia online y modo híbrido, ni tener aquellos partners que están ahí detrás nuestro, indistintamente de lo que suceda, indistintamente de la situación. Así que desde aquí, desde la organización, desde mi persona, desde todos los que lo estamos viendo, muchísimas gracias a los sponsors por hacer esto posible. Y ahora, como dirían en inglés, without further ado, si estáis listos y estáis preparados, dejadme que os presente al primer ponente. Pues para presentaros nuestra primera ponencia del día, va a ser espectacular, una persona con la que he tenido varias entrevistas, grandísima persona, grandísima trayectoria, es el cofundador de TinyBird, pero además de ser cofundador de TinyBird, es el former VP of Engineering y Chief Development Officer, o former Chief Development Officer en Carto, así que de esto sabe mucho, y justo de su experiencia y su trayectoria nos va a estar hablando un poco más de ¿cuáles son las tendencias a futuro a nivel del CTO? ¿En qué se debería estar enfocando el CTO en el futuro? Y huelga decir que lo que están trabajando en TinyBird es cutting edge, no solo en España, sino a nivel mundial. Así que precisamente para hablar de the one thing CTOs should focus on mastering over the next 5 years, tenemos a nuestro siguiente ponente, co-founder de TinyBird, Jorge Gómez Sancha. Y acordaros, por favor, antes de meteros, que vamos a ir recogiendo las preguntas que le vayáis haciendo a Jorge mientras va saliendo su charla para que yo le pueda ir a hacer las preguntas posteriormente. Así que mientras la escucháis, si se os van ocurriendo cosas, por favor, id introduciendo las preguntas que el equipo de realización las irá cogiendo y me las irá cantando a mí. Disfrutar mucho, os dejo con Jorge, pasadlo bien.
I read recently that by 2024 there will be 100 or more than 150 zettabytes of data produced by humankind. That is a staggering amount of data. I had to look it up and make some calculations. It's about 150 billion terabytes. That's 150 to the power of times 10 to the power of 21 bytes. So if you would think that a terabyte is a second, that would still be almost 5,000 years. And that is more than 3 times the data that we have produced as a species until today by 2024. So you take all the data we have produced until today, multiply that by 3, and you get what we'll have in 4 years from now. So what should CTOs focus on? Well, that's the name of my talk, and you guessed it, it has to do with data. So I've decided to do this talk a little bit in reverse, because since there's going to be a lot of people watching this remotely, I thought I would do it as remote friendly as possible. So I'm going to start telling you what are the takeaways from this talk, so that if you're looking after your children or you're doing something else and you need to walk away, at least you will know what is it I'm here to talk about. So let's start by the end of this talk, which is what are the takeaways? What are the things that a CTO should be focusing on mastering over the next 5 years? The first thing is understanding how to run large data projects. With this growth, your biggest challenge is going to be around data and around analytics, even if you don't think so right now. You might be working for a small startup, or you might be doing some projects that right now don't necessarily deal with a lot of data. But if you have some success, give it 4 or 5 years, and you'll be dealing with a lot of data in all likelihood. So understanding how to efficiently run large data projects is going to be one of the key things that CTOs should master. The second takeaway, and there are 3, is that understanding the internals of databases and what really goes under the covers will keep paying off for many, many years. You see, data grows faster than database technology. So, unlike in other areas where we are constantly having sort of higher levels of abstraction, and we can leave the heavy lifting for the CPUs and so on, with data, we can't always have that luxury because it grows so fast, and the amount of data that we need to deal with is so big that understanding what really goes under the covers is going to be very important still for a long time. And the third takeaway is that the meaning of being data-driven, for a company being data-driven, is changing. So, and essentially, you know, until now, data-driven was about making data-driven decisions. But we are beyond that now, and we're beyond data democratization. We're beyond giving access to people to data. And that's something that we will talk about as well. So these are the 3 key takeaways of this talk. And now I'm going to unpack them a little bit and talk about why. But before that, why should you listen to me? I am not even a CTO anymore. Most of what I do nowadays, or for the last year and a half or so, has been about sales. So, well, the first thing is I have an interesting background, and actually it matches really well what I'm going to talk about in this talk. And I started in Vivanjo. Well, these are just 3 companies I've been involved with, but I guess the ones that I've been involved with for a longer time and that have had a bigger impact in my career and my understanding of the business and technology. So Vivanjo is a company that I founded. Carto is a very well-known startup in Spain, and Tinybird is the company that I co-founded and that I'm working on right now. So in Vivanjo, the focus, or what I learned, what I took out from Vivanjo, was a lot about software development, how to build software efficiently, how to work collaboratively and as a team, and create a great company culture. In Carto, I learned a lot about dealing with data and about what the data challenges of our customers were. And in Tinybird, which is where I'm right now, we're really focused on analytics. And you know, here I'm not doing a technical role. All of the founders, we were technical, but I was the least technical of all, so I get to do sales. And I thought at the beginning, you know, that was going to sort of diminish my understanding of what's going on in data and in technology. But actually, since the CEO of a company And the person that deals with sales in the first stages of a company needs to ensure is that you get to product market fit. That means talking to a lot of people. And I have the very interesting viewpoint right now of being able to talk to hundreds of CTOs and data engineers and chief data officers in many, many companies that we're reaching out to. So that's giving me a lot of perspective on what's going on in the industry. Okay, so let's get to it. This is the first takeaway. From DevOps to DataOps, and why understanding how to run large data projects is going to be key. Let me rewind really quickly to 2008. In 2008, I was presenting at another conference at RailsConf Madrid, which was all the rage back then. And I was presenting with a colleague from Vivanjo, and this was the talk that we were doing, BDD from the trenches, behavior-driven development from the trenches. And that talk was a huge success because we were talking about things like this, user stories. We were talking about something that you all know perfectly well, but at the time, this was really out there. This was like, really, user stories? That's all the rage. Everyone was super interested in how we were working on this, and we got a lot of people that wanted to work with us because we were doing user stories, agile, test-driven development, and that was 12 years ago. Now, fast forward to 2010, and I'm with my co-founder in a discussion about selling the company potentially with a large French group, corporate, that is very interesting in acquiring Vivanjo. And when we come to the technical discussion, there were two CTOs over there, one from the larger group and another one from one of the subsidiaries, the coolest one. And these were the slides that we were showing them. I'm just showing you this because I love to show them, but it makes a point as well. Like, we use Max, like, you know, we stand for something. We code Ruby Rails on TextMate. We use Git distributed version control and source repository. And check out the browsers. There wasn't even Chrome back then. But we also had slides like this, acceptance and unit. By the way, this company ended up acquiring us, which I don't understand how when they saw this slides, which I'm sure they had never seen before, something like this. And we had slides like this one, with talking about continuous integration and how it provides great coverage, helps us reduce the need for QA, and encourages to release more often. Now, these were concepts that were pretty new at the time, and the guys at this large French company, they just were blown away, not just by the amazing slides, but also because of the practices that we, a small startup in Spain, were doing. And if you now fast forward to 2020, we all take this for granted. We all assume as technical teams, the first thing you do is you start a project, and the moment you need to work with someone else, or the moment you have to put something in production, you set up continuous integration, you set up continuous deployment, you build your tests. Whether you do test-driven development or not, doesn't matter, but you have tests and you run them and you make them part of your build, and you probably deploy many times to production in one day. And the thing is, this is so because for a lot of years, during those years from 2010 and over, this was the focus of CTOs. CTOs were learning how to write software more efficiently. They were learning how to build with teams collaboratively, how to work remotely, how to do all of the best practices that we now take for granted. That was the focus for CTOs for a long time. And during those times, it was the times of Agile. Agile was in full bloom, and lean, startup, and Agile, the best thing that came out of that, in my opinion, was that it propelled things like DevOps, continuous integration, and infrastructure as code, and those kinds of things. Because if you think about it, what's the point of doing sprints every week if you can't release code as often as you want, if you have to wait for months to release code? Well, all of those learnings were absolutely key learnings. And what happens is that developers now, they don't start by learning waterfall and then move on to later, a few years later, to continuous integration. That's the basis. Everyone assumes this is the case. Everyone assumes that now infrastructure needs to be managed as code, and it's something that has been a great legacy for that. Whether you think that Agile is dead or not, and all of those discussions, I think this was the best outcome of those years. And data ops, which is taking a book from this page from the same book of DevOps, is the next key thing to master for CTOs. And the goal being enabling data teams to develop new analytics projects, just like continuous integration and continuous deployment enable developers to release software often and with quality. The next key thing is to master data ops for CTOs. The reason being, again, data is growing so fast, everything is revolving around data, that it's going to become essential. And if you think about infrastructure as code, data ops is taking all of the same learnings and applying them as well. So, data projects, right now what we're seeing, and when we started running projects in TinyBird with our customers and helping them run our projects, run data projects, we understood that we couldn't just have run queries and have them any place. We wanted to run them, and we wanted to have them in the same way that we run software. So we have data projects with schema definitions, with queries and migrations that are stored as text files, and that are we put in version control so that we can do collaborative work, so that our customers can do collaborative work and work as a team. We can enable regression tests as well, so that when you change queries or you change API endpoints on top of your queries, you can check whether you're breaking something, whether the result is the same, whether it's faster or whether it's slower. We're building, we set up continuous integration for those changes as well, just like we did for software, we do for software. And as well, monitoring system and introspection to guarantee SLAs, because as data grows, probably your data pipelines get slower, and you need to make sure that those are well maintained and that you have a great outlook of what's going on. And these things we started doing because we needed to do them. We didn't plan to put them in our product, but eventually we are putting all of these features in our product because we just don't understand a way to run data projects, analytics projects in any other way. And we're seeing this across the board. We're seeing this in large companies. No matter what technologies you use, eventually data as code is something that is happening all over the place. And it's important to understand how to set it up and to master it, because this is the bulk of the work for CTOs is going to come from this. Let's look at the next one. So mastering database internals. And why understanding what's going on under the covers will continue to pay off. So every senior technical person that I've met understand data and databases generally. They know how to run queries. They know how the database largely works. They understand, how to normalize data, how to run joins, all of those things. They know SQL. But very, very few, and this is something we've realized in TinyBird, very, very few really know what goes on under the covers. Now, normally, that's absolutely fine. Why? Because when you're starting applications and what you want is to iterate quickly, and you want to get, worrying about milliseconds is not your main problem. You have to, you'll eventually hit those problems, but you want to start working, and you can be super effective without understanding the internals of a database. Also, with transactional applications, what happens is most of the time, you can solve a lot of the problems just throwing more hardware at it. And eventually you'll get to a point where you need to optimize, but it's fine for a long time. Let me tell you an example of why that's not exactly the case when you're dealing with huge amounts of data. This is something that happened today. I just took this from a Teams conversation with one of our customers that asks, have you touched something in Pro? Have you touched something in the production environment? Like, we've improved performance significantly. If you look at the green chart, you can see how at a given point, performance just stabilizes and goes below 1 second per request. This is a customer that's running peaks of 120, 160, 180 requests per second sometimes over a 5 billion rows data set. That is a huge amount of requests and a huge amount of data. Now, we had 2 ways to solve this problem. We had seen performance getting worse over the last few days because we had new peaks coming at certain times. And we had 2 ways to solve this problem. One way was throw more hardware at the problem. So yes, we know that there's a certain amount of data, a certain amount of requests coming in. So if we throw more CPU cores, we can split the load and we can ensure that we can deal with that load. But that problem was solved by reducing the amount of time it takes each request by 30%. We found a specific problem that was adding, well, 30%. The 30% increase is just with no database access. So if you remove database access and the time it takes to go to the database and return, there was still a 30% we could get. Maybe that's 40 milliseconds, 50 milliseconds improvement for each request. But those 40 milliseconds, when you have peaks of 150 requests, 160 requests, those 50 milliseconds, they add up. Essentially, it's less CPU time that you're using per request, and eventually we can deal with the same amount of data in a much more performant way. And that is because we've spent a lot of time figuring out what was going on and understanding how the data was being stored, how data was being extracted, where the bottlenecks were in the requests, in the application, and we fixed it. So the thing is, the key thing to understand is with huge amounts of data and or requests, details compound. There's a saying attributed to Benjamin Franklin that says, watch the pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves. Obviously, he wasn't talking about hardware costs, but it perfectly applies to hardware costs. If you have very deep pockets, yes, you can solve these problems sometimes just by throwing more infrastructure at it, but how long can you keep up doing that? How long can you delay solving those problems? So we found that the more we understand what goes on under the covers, the faster we can go, the more cost-effective we can be, and the better performance we can provide to our customers. And the reason we started Tinybird is because we understood that there's a combination of things that is not going to change. One is data is not going to stop growing anytime soon, as we said earlier. And there's never going to be a time when customers don't want faster access to data. So investing in the internals always is going to keep paying off for a long time. And when I talk about internals, I mean things like, how does your database store the data in the disk and how does it read it? How is data compressed? What kind of compression algorithms work best for what kind of data? How do joins work under the covers? Why the joins that you've used and are familiar with and have been successful with in Postgres or MySQL don't necessarily work when you're trying to do analytics over billions of rows. So understanding all of those things is really important. And maybe you're a CTO and you have, or of a large organization and you don't have time to now go down to the internals, but at least you need to make sure that you have the skills within your team to understand that so that you can deal with these kinds of problems and remain competitive and remain cost effective, because all of these details compound over time. So let's go for the third one and last one, which is the new meaning of data-driven. I was saying at the beginning that data-driven doesn't mean the same thing as it used to mean, and now it's starting to mean actually driven by data, not just making decisions based on data. And I put there something that I heard one time, which is everything is amazing and nobody's happy. And you'll understand why in a second. So as data grows, there's something else that contracts almost as fast, and that's the time to insight. Basically, time to insight, I mean how much time a business manager or business owner is willing to wait to get insights out of the data that you're collecting. So if you think about how data democratization has worked, data democratization was about giving access to any user in the company to the data so that they could understand what was going on with the business, they could ask questions to the data and make decisions based on data. And that's been a huge movement, and it's spawned entire industries of business intelligence, and companies like Tableau or Microsoft's Power BI or many other business intelligence tools, but also data warehousing technology and all kinds of things. But this is still critically important for planning and for product management, which more and more is run using data, and for data science and for modeling and for many, many things. But it's not just about understanding the data and then making decisions based on those things. If you think about the different types of analytics that you normally talk about, you can think of descriptive analytics. That's building charts and so that they explain the data that you're seeing coming in, so you can figure out how much you sold, or you can figure out, what was the problem with some of your pipeline, whatever. That's descriptive analytics. It helps you explain what's happened. But then you can do predictive analytics. So based on the data, using machine learning and data science, you can figure out what's going to happen. You can try to figure out what's going to happen. And based on that, you can then make decisions. But the last step is prescriptive analytics, which using the previous step, using the predictions that you're making based on the data, it tells you this is what you need to do. And if you go far enough, it does it automatically. And there's a lot of companies that are already there, and especially the ones that have an unfair advantage. Think of Amazon, for instance, or that we feel have an unfair advantage. These guys, they absolutely understand this. They absolutely understand that once you understand what the data is telling you, if you can make it fast enough, and if you can have access to it in real time, you can then automate those decisions that a human would take. And if you think about the logistics in Amazon, and those warehouses are no longer run by humans. If you think about it, they're run by the data, and this is something that we are seeing out there more and more. And I said Amazon, but there's many other companies that are enabling these kinds of things. And in order to do prescriptive and in order to do operational analytics, you need more than access. You need a number of things first. You need to first ensure you have well-defined business-wide data points. That means there's an agreement within the company of what each data point means and how it is calculated. What does constitute a sale specifically if you're selling all over the world and if do you take into account the currency exchange, what currency exchange, at what rate, for what day, do you use an average of the last days, or do you use the rate exactly at which you sold? So all of those things, if you just give access to users, and even if they know SQL, they won't be able to tell what the right answer is. There won't be agreement in how those data points are calculated. So you need a way to very clearly define, okay, this is how we define this data point and provide access to it, make it available in a secure and scalable way to developers across the organization so that they can use that data to build business value, to operationalize basically that data, and whether that's for automating the response or whether that's for integrating with other systems or whatever the case. But those are the guys that can turn this data into business value. So you need to make it accessible to them and make sure that everyone across the organization is seeing the same data. They need to be well documented and scalable. They need to be able to integrate several data sources because in companies there's data all over the place, there's business units, there's all kinds of things. You need to be able to bring together that data or do it in a federated way so that each business unit is responsible and there's agreement across the organizations on how to interact. And lastly, it needs to be available in real time, because the longer it takes to get access to what's going on, to understand how your business is unfolding, the harder it is to operationalize, because you don't know exactly what's going on. If you have to wait 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours to understand what's going on, it's very difficult to automate and to make decisions on the spot. So what should CTOs focus on mastering from now on? Well, again, you guessed right, it has to do with data. Thank you very much.